I like to enter these things kind of light. So, is there anything happening at all in y'all's world this spring?
Spring training.
Spring training? What about at the state level? Anything at all keeping y'all busy?
I can't think of much. How about you, Bart?
No, I mean, same here. I mean, we got a little skill development going on, and I've been a little bit busy just because Simone's been covering Elite Eight and Final Four, but other than that, I mean, just hanging at the house.
Well, I guess I'll just have to bring it up directly though. How about this transfer issue and the charge to what to try to fix this thing? Just kind of how did this come about for I mean certainly for you guys, but getting it to the point that it's at now. How just where did it start and really why did it start?
You know, Coach, I'll kind of jump in and coaching camaraderie is how it started. I mean, Coach Yeager and I have talked in the off season for I don't know 10 years now at least. Coach Busby and myself have talked for probably longer than that. Coach Kennedy, since he moved in the state, we've just formed that coaching bond, that brotherhood that we all, at one time all of us kind of had. You share, hey, what's going on in your world up there in Birmingham, and what's going on down here in Mobile, and so we frequently have those conversations, and I know Coach Yeager and I will talk on a normal year, probably once a month, just catch up with one another, kind of see how they're doing and what they're doing up there. And traditionally we've kind of shared, hey coach, what are you doing in your character ed and what are you doing in your off season that's innovative? And what we kind of found out this year is he and I were talking and we said, it's really kind of sad that all we talk about now is who's transferring where, who's acquiring what talent, and and it's the same way when we talk to Coach Busby or Coach Kennedy. It's not it's not coach talk anymore. It's who's going where and who has the latest 5-star move in and those kind of things. So I think it kind of jumped off from there. And then Coach Yeager, he's a pretty sharp guy. He and I got to talking and basically said, look, enough is enough. I mean, what can we do about it? So we lobbied for a meeting with Mr. Harmon, who at the time was the new executive director. And, fortunately, he's the guy that comes in and understands the climate and the issues that he's about to face. And that's probably the one that you hear the most about. I think people are just at a tipping point with it. Everywhere you go, you hear people discussing it and and complaining. But we said, hey, you can either be part of the people complaining or maybe someone to offer some solutions or try to help. And that's what we offered Mr. Harmon is our help. We just said, hey, we care about our sport. We love our sport. We don't want to see our sport die. So how can we help you? And I think our initial meeting kind of led to him sending us an email and asking that we present some of this stuff to the central board. Coach Egg, I'll kind of let you take over from there, but I think that's kind of how this thing got started. It was just super informal and a couple of guys that love football and care where the sport's headed.
One thing that I remember too was, we had the ALFCA convention in Montgomery, and then David Lundberg has one in the summer last year, and a bunch of coaches get together. And in those meetings that we have, coaches are saying somebody's got to do something. How many times have you heard that? I mean, somebody has to do something. And so we got to talking, and to me, somebody's us. I mean, and I think that all of us just got, to a point where, number one, let's look and just see how it really is affecting our sport. Is it affecting it the way that we think that it is, or the way that everybody thinks that it is? Bart talks about, there were 25 proposals this time, and 2 of them had to do with transfers. And Bart, you know more of the numbers than I do, but they passed overwhelmingly, and I'll let you speak on that.
Yeah, yeah, and the saying you always hear is the membership makes the rules, and that's certainly true. The way our legislative process works within the High School Athletic Association, for those that don't know, is a survey is sent out. Any school can submit what's called a proposal for a new rule, basically. Those are compiled and sent out from the state office to every high school in the state of Alabama who has a vote in a survey. The results of that survey are then presented at a legislative council meeting, which happened actually the afternoon of the morning that we presented our stuff to the central board. So that meeting happens that afternoon, and I happen to be a District 1 representative on the legislative council. The legislative council members get the results of that survey. And there are only two that were even close to passing in the statewide numbers, and those were both dealing with transfers. There were only two dealing with transfers of the 25, and there was overwhelming support. One of those is the creation of a new column in Dragonfly, where you simply identify if a student athlete is a transfer or not. That's something that those of us have been kind of talking about for years, that we felt like would be a pretty simple thing, because then it gives you true quantifiable data that you can't argue with. And it also lets you'll hear people just kind of throw things out like, it's just the world we live in, society is so transient now. Well, those people are telling you things that are not true because it benefits them. And there's really no other way to say that, because you look at any data, 93, 95% of student athletes start at a high school and finish at a high school. And that's what the data is going to tell us. It may be a little bit lower than that, but it's going to be in the 90 percentile. Well, if 90% of people are doing things one way, that's who you need to legislate for, is that 90%. And you need to protect that 90%. I mean, I don't know any other democratic organization or country that would work any other way. You're not going to legislate for the 10%. You're going to try to legislate for the 90%. So that Dragonfly column will tell us that. And obviously it will tell you where concentrations of transfers end up happening. Now how the association uses that information, I would think that if there's a huge concentration of transfers, that their investigators may go take a look at some of these places. I certainly would if I were in power up there. And that's not to say that anything is amiss or going wrong at those places, but certainly I would go in and look, if for no other reason, to tell the rest of the membership, hey, we went and looked at that school and they're doing everything exactly the way they're supposed to. I'm sure there are going to be some cases that's true. A lot of these transfers are compliant transfers. We understand that. There's probably some non-compliant ones throughout the state, but there's a lot of compliant ones. And then the second thing that passed, dealing with transfers, is something that's kind of a common sense thing that we've talked about for years and years, and that deals with in-season transfers. So essentially, if a student transfers during the middle of football season, they would not be able to play football at two high schools during the same season. Now, when basketball rolled around, if they had checked every box and everything was correct in their transfer and their move, they'll be eligible for basketball or other winter sports, wrestling, spring sports. But the idea that you can play 6, 7, 8 weeks at one place, and hey, you get eliminated from the playoffs, so you go over here and join up the team that's got a chance to win it. We're seeing that happen a little bit more and more, and I think people were quite frankly a little tired of it.
Yeah, for sure. Coach Yeager, I'm curious, well, either of you, whoever can speak to this, what, like, presenting to the central board, as far as you can tell me, like, what was that presentation like? What what were you showing them, and what was kind of the reaction?
Well, I guess the big thing was we put a lot of numbers to um, to the presentation. In other words, we didn't go in there. We've said we did not go in there looking at a team. We didn't go in there looking at a player. We went in there and just looked at the situation. And so we basically, when we looked at this, we divided up into two different parts. One was is this really an issue? Is it impacting the sport? And that was really the part of my presentation. And then Bart's was, he took there were a lot of people involved in gathering numbers. I mean, it was a massive effort, and I'll let him talk about that in a minute. But there was a massive, massive effort. Uh, you know, we chose 6A because largest sample size, 58 schools, 4,363 athletes. We checked every one of them. And the big thing was, what's, just what is the history of this player? And like Bart said, are they migrating to the same place? And is there a common theme? Are there a common thread in these players that are migrating? Which there was. And the bottom line is, with no emotion, with no agenda, we just said, look, here's the numbers. And the feedback that we got from the board members was that it was very, 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 very eye-opening, because a lot of it, you hear things that you think it's speculation, or you hear a rumor, whatever. We took the rumor out of it, and
Yes.
it was really when Mr. Harmon told us that we were going to have the opportunity to present, we were in a very tight window as far as time. And I'll just say, from the time that we were given until the time we presented, my staff, we worked on it every single day because it was massive. It was a massive, massive undertaking. Um, and so, but that was the feedback that we got. But it was really we knew that we had really going into it. We said it several times. We approached it like it was a game. We knew that this is something that can impact the entire sport for the entire state. We didn't want to mess it up, and we knew too, that there would be a lot of players out there that were counting on us to get this thing right, and so, that was, to me, the driving force behind all of it. Like I said, Bart was the numbers guy, and I was is this an impact? And but I'll let him address the numbers situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think Coach said a couple of things that I want to reemphasize. When you have an audience of the Central Board of Control of the state of Alabama, there was a lot of pressure. I felt like on our group of guys, that we didn't want to screw this up, because you're standing in front of 16 of the top superintendents, principals, athletic minded people within the state, and we wanted to be sure that what we presented, number one, was factual. We didn't want to go in and it be Bart Sessions' opinion, because that's irrelevant. My opinion is irrelevant when it comes to policy and the reality of stuff. So we wanted to have true data, and that turned into 4 staffs. We pulled every rule throughout 50 states regarding transfers and recruiting. And we studied and poured through them and went through and looked for commonalities and things that may be working in places and things that may not be working. And that took several weeks. And then obviously when you go through 4,363 athletes, one by one, and some of them take a lot longer than others. Some of them are very easily identifiable as a kid that's, been in a school for his entire life, and some of them are a little bit trickier. So you have to kind of learn how to do it. And fortunately, we both have some young, very tech savvy guys on our staff that were able to teach us some tricks. But in today's society, I mean, everyone leaves such a digital footprint out there.
Yeah.
That if you know how to look and you're willing to work, we felt really good about our data being accurate, and we still feel really good about it being accurate, because it is so easy to find all this stuff. When you're dealing with one person, it's easy. When you're dealing with 4,363, you have to have, an organization. And like Coach said, we just kind of approached it like a practice schedule. We divided it up. Hey, you take this area of the state, I'll take this area, and then we farmed it out to our staffs who pitched in and helped. And man, I know those guys are glad that the data collection part of it is over with. My staff tells me that every time I walk in the office. But once we got the data, it was pretty eye-opening. Is the first thing. I think it was shocking even to us who kind of thought that this was going on, and you hear all the tales and the rumor mill stuff. But I think it was shocking even to us who were in it every day. I know when we presented to the central board, just from the looks on some faces, that there were people that were just shocked at some of the data points that we were able to pull. And of course the first one is pretty simple. I mean, what we found is out of 4,363 6A athletes, I think there were 268 transfers, which that equates to about 6%. Now, that number may be a little bit up or down. There's some of them that when the dragonfly comes out, maybe it is a little bit different. Maybe it's closer to 8%. Maybe it's closer to 5%, but it's not going to be far off. And then you looked at, that basically means that there are about 5 per school, when you look at it across the entire state. Well, that doesn't seem like a lot, so then we looked at, all right, are a lot of these transfers, Coach used the word migrating. That's a great word, migrating to one place, because that's the complaint you always hear. I mean, this guy over here gets all the transfers. So, and when you pull that, that's unquestionable. When you have 10 schools had 10 plus transfers, when you take those 10 out of the picture, now that per school average drops down to below 2.5. So a pretty big difference. And that kind of, there's some logic in that. You can see 2 or 3 people naturally moving into a community or having to change schools for work or whatever reason. 10 and 12 on one roster, and 25% of your entire roster, those seem like pretty high numbers to me. And it certainly leads to some questions of safety would be one thing. We kind of look at that really, really hard, because obviously we play a sport that's constantly attacked due to concussions and other safety issues. So we're already under attack. So we wanted to be sure that we looked at the safety part, and I'm not sure how having some of the collection of stars on one team playing against normal high school kids could be viewed any other way than unsafe. And we also looked at the competitive angle of it. What it tells us is in the upper classifications, at least, playoffs are dominated by teams that, for whatever reason, have a high percentage of transfers. Now, that can be a chicken or egg conversation. Well, the reason we have so many transfers is because we're having all this success, and that may be the case, but it certainly contributes to a competitive advantage, and Coach, I feel like I'm eating up all your time, but Coach Yeager did a great job of laying all this out and helping keep me on task. As you can see, I can kind of start rambling, so Coach kept me on task.
No, and I want to ask you one other thing, Coach Sessions. With the numbers and y'all dividing this up among your staffs and other staffs and stuff, like going through 4,300 athletes one by one, and you mentioned tech savvy. How did they do that? Like, that's an incredible workload. Like, what did they kind of do to come to that 200 plus transfers out of 4,300 kids?
I'm not going to give away all of our secrets.
Sure.
Coach Yeager and I have kind of talked about that. A couple of things that we're not going to do. We're not going to talk data as it relates to a specific school, because we're not trying to paint any school in any kind of negative light.
Sure.
That's not what this is about. It's about saving our sport. And at the same time, though, it's kind of interesting. There are numerous ways in today's AI world. There are numerous AI search engines. There are numerous AI tools that help you if you know the right questions to ask, which Bart Sessions does not. But I have some young coaches, and Coach Yeager have some savvy coaches who do know how. And when you're dealing with 4 staffs, there's always someone that knows an investigator somewhere, or a detective, or an FBI, or someone who can point you in the right direction of publicly available things. Again, this was not something that we got from the High School Athletic Association. We were able to get this all through public information, but it is a time-consuming process. It's easy to do. You could do it yourself. Just takes time. So
one thing, like Bart was talking about with the AI, that if you start using AI sort of picks up on how you're thinking. Like it'll ask you follow-up questions. And so when you go down that path, like for instance, I'll give you an example. A lot of times, when people, this was almost comical. When a player transfers, the staff will have them delete accounts or delete posts, that relate to where he was before, really to just try and cover the path. Well, I'm going to tell you, AI loves that. It just fixates on that and goes, and it just won't let go of it. And it goes to I can't remember parents posts. But one thing too, like the kids these days, like there's a guy that wrote a book called the Age of Narcissism, and he's talking about we're living in a generation where nobody wants to succeed without everybody knowing about it. Like if I have an accomplishment, I've got to put it out there, and it's not fulfilling unless everybody knows about it. It's not that I succeeded for the sake of succeeding. Everybody must know about it. There has never been a digital footprint like what we see now. And it's not just the kids. The parents wear these kids around their neck like a gold medal, and they are worse than the kids, And so 2 things that just struck me was this.
Aunts, cousins, ex-girlfriends,
everybody.
You can't hide it.
So when it would hit a dead end on something like that, man, it was phenomenal. Like it just blew my mind how suddenly it might go to a different, like AI knew who their parents was. AI knew, and all of a sudden these posts just kept jumping out at you. The other thing was this. We said we're going to focus on the circumstance, the condition that's in this within our sport. We're not going to focus on the team. We're not going to focus on a coach. And all of a sudden AI would come up with things like, has this coach, did he have this many transfers before he changed jobs? And it was like, we're not going there.
Yeah, throw that out. Yeah.
And so you ask about the thing about Dragonfly. This is what Dragonfly is going to do. Dragonfly is going to bring to whatever level it's going to bring incredible transparency. In other words, now the coaches will be able to police this. In other words, let's say that a player moves from school A to B, and he doesn't get labeled as a transfer. He's labeled as his home school. Well, where he transferred knows, and now this community, the coaching community knows that thing it will last it won't even last 24 hours before somebody says this player was mislabeled. He played for me or whatever. So that's the beauty of it. And the other thing too is that, one thing in 1996 when the Super Six started, and then they started later, it was in Legion Field, and then later they started televising it and everything. The private schools were very, very successful. But when you're playing 6 classifications, they're playing all these different sites. Well, all of a sudden you bring them to one place and all the public gets to see it. And then it gets on TV and all the public gets to see it. And then everybody says, you know what? For some reason, there's a competitive imbalance here. And so, and that's a core value of the Alabama High School Athletic Association, which is a level playing field. And so they said there's a competitive imbalance here. So it really got no traction. Now, the coaching community was aware of this for a while, but it got no traction as long as it was just in the coaching community. Once it got into the public, once it got to the politicians, the wheels of change started turning. And then later again, I think it was maybe, 2000, I want to say 15, 16, 17, somewhere in there. Then the competitive, it was the same kind of thing. But so my point is this, whatever happens, our parents are required to sign a consent form that says, I'm aware of the risk involved in this sport. I'm aware of the dangers. And I can assure you from our research, they have no clue. They have no clue what they're sending their children into because we didn't know. When we got to looking into this. The parents don't know. Joe Q Public does not know because I was shocked. And I'll tell you this, the central board members from across the state of Alabama, they were shocked. And so when that gets into the public, that's the whole thing that's about to happen is transparency, which that's what should happen.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's kind of like you said, or like y'all have said, like now it becomes a publicly like a transparent thing that, like you said, you're not out to, target this school, that school, whatever, but there will be information out there that anybody can see. And then people can pretty easily deduce what they want to take from that or what you'll be able to take from that from different schools, because it's going to show up, for everybody, regardless of classification. So anytime you've got transparency in anything, you can't have too much transparency. It's a good thing, and it's very needed. We live in such a I remember about, I don't know, over the last couple of years, you would start seeing it more and more. Y'all talked about digital footprint, and I want to ask them about that in a second. But we would start to see, I've seen it across certainly other states that are really backing, NIL at the high school level and all this mess, and kids creating graphics to transfer high schools. It's insanity. But we would start seeing so much of that where all of a sudden you go to, kids these days, when we put their names in the newspaper from a Friday night, they don't really care. They care about that you tweeted about them during the game and that you tagged them. So we have to follow all these kids so that on Friday night you can quickly tag them in something, Joe Smith, 7-yard run, touchdown, whatever. And then as you're following these kids now, it will be like if they don't put out some announcement graphic or whatever, you go to their page and then all of a sudden it's no longer school A in the bio. It's all of a sudden in the off season now it's school B, and it's like a very quiet kind of deal. And unless you're really following it like you coaches would, or people like us that write about these guys would, you don't know until kickoff in August that you're like, what? That kid's here now? And it's like, yeah, he has been for 6 months. But what I did want to go back to really fast. I just kind of want to joke about this for a minute. Did y'all ever see AI as part of your jobs as a high school football coach?
No, they didn't. They never talked us about that. And every time we've had a workshop here, professional development with AI, I'm like, y'all never need that. It's not wrong.
You don't need it until you do.
Don't need it until you
do. It's actually crazy just how much you can use it now in our line of work. And both of us already had a little bit of exposure to using AI to sort some data for us just within our football realm. So, but yes, it's incredible.
It's crazy. Like
does nowadays.
It's crazy because I'm as someone who writes a lot of things, I'm kind of last to technological advances all the time because I'm kind of old school and I'm like, I don't want to deal with something new. Just leave me alone on, I'll have Facebook and Twitter, and I'll still do stuff on Zoom, even though most people left this behind in 2020 during COVID. But now I use it all the time. But I lost my train of thought. I hate when that happens. But
I'll tell you one thing though, on the AI that I wasn't aware of, AI will talk to you like when you're talking, have a conversation, Yeah. And so I didn't realize this till my son showed me, I had this, real dignified kind of guy talking, and the next thing he changes the voice and it's this British lady, and you get all these voices and stuff, whatever's to your flavor,
Yeah.
But anyway,
I remember what I was going to say. Well, like I'm kind of the last to try this stuff. I know like literally this week, especially, there's all these trends going around, like, upload a photo and it turns you into an action figure or into an animation, whatever. And so I took it and I was like, I'm going to try some of this. Coach Yeager, you know about this kind of stuff. Coach Sessions, I don't know if you do, but I'm a big local history guy. I do a bunch of local history
Sure.
stuff. And so I took some different history videos that I'm going to be working on, and I typed in just the various topics, most of them around Trussville, and was like, hey, tell me, write me a paragraph about the Birmingham Mineral Railroad in Trussville, or whatever it might be. And, I know it's scouring the web, and more often than not, a bunch of these topics that I plugged in are so niche that, like, it's going to pull something that I wrote from somewhere. And so I typed all these in, like a couple dozen of these things, and saved all of the documents for a script that I'll have for these videos. And then I just go in, and it's like most of it's stuff that I've written, and then it's just kind of pulled the key points, made it more concise, and then I'll just edit straight from those and change up the language. So it's like it gives me this like almost skeleton version of what I want, and then instead of creating it from scratch, now all I've got to do is change this here, add this there, maybe change up the order a little bit, but it gives me something to work with immediately. It's incredible. That was a weird sidebar, but
no, it truly is. You're right, and the more we use it, the more we found out very similar things. Just to go back to one thing you were talking about earlier, how you're seeing, you see some places that you don't see a lot of these announcements anymore. And what we kind of noticed, it's kind of funny when you see it, since we did our presentation, most of our coaches that went and did this research screen grabbed or took a screenshot of, hey, here's what I base this off of. If for no other reason, they dropped in a file just to keep a count. If you stopped during the middle of a roster, whatever the case may be, you could go back. And it was interesting, a couple of days after this hit, just to kind of go back and see, what's still out there. And it's amazing that some of it is no longer out there, so that's kind of interesting.
yeah.
And then the other trend that we've kind of noticed, and we don't have data on this, of course, but you'll notice a lot of the big announcements, the big graphic announcements, are for newly hired or new staffs come to town, and you see a bunch of these shiny graphics get a bunch of momentum, and then those same people a couple of years down the road, maybe when they're a little more established, things are takes 4, 5, 6 months to figure out where people are at. Kind of interesting how some of that works,
It is.
So it will be very interesting to see now that things are going to be completely transparent, and everybody can see some of the things that we've been seeing.
Absolutely. Wanted to ask both of you this because, and y'all kind of touched on it, but I kind of want to go back to it, maybe dive a bit into it. It's an obvious question, and the question is why is this important? But there are going to be people, especially at schools, that will be affected by this. That will be they'll be more talked about now. They're already being talked about, but they'll be more talked about now. What's kind of at the heart of this for y'all? Because you've already seen people that are like, oh, they're just doing this to win, or they're mad about this or that. But like what y'all are doing is, to me, and tell me if you agree with this or not. To me, this isn't a legacy thing for Bart Sessions at Alma Bryant. This isn't a legacy thing for Chris Yeager at Mountain Brook. This is a legacy thing for high school football in the state of Alabama.
Yeah. Well, for me, I'll tell you this. We first started the ALFCA. It was for coaches to have a voice.
Yeah.
And as we're doing this, Bart said something a few weeks ago in an interview that I was beside, and it just hit me. He said, the 4- and 5-star athlete does not need a voice. He's got a voice. The recruiter's his voice. The media is his voice. That guy's got a platform and he's got a voice. Okay, so in Alabama, there are 35,000 football players in the state of Alabama. Okay, so this next year, 34,300 will not sign a scholarship. They will not play beyond the community team. The community team, um, there's kids that make up these community teams, that they've dreamed of playing this their whole life. They're following in the footsteps of a big brother, um, father, grandfather in some cases. And they're not going to play. And so after high school, and this is it. And so that's the community football player. That's sort of who I want to be a voice for. The other one is this. As we got to looking at this, there are some teams that have an incredible concentration of talent. And I believe this. I believe every player, I believe every person. If you want to transfer, you know what? That's your prerogative. This is the United States of America, and you should have that prerogative if you want to do that. But we're in an association where we all made a choice whether or not to join this association. Our association says this, and they have proven they've acted on this historically, that when the playing field is no longer level, they have to do something. Okay, so you 100% have a right to transfer, but when you have an unlevel playing field, or when the safety of players is an issue, it's the responsibility of the Alabama High School Athletic Association to act. If they don't, why even have one? I mean, we can get that without having an association. We can be careless, and we can have all-star teams without having an association. But this is the one thing that I noticed. I coach a community team. My team, we will hold our own against anybody. We have beat all-star teams before. But in our preparation, this is one of the things I saw. There are struggling community teams. Mm-hmm. That sometimes line up with 15-year-old boys, 14 and 15-year-old boys. And they are across from a person that's going to be in an SEC school in about 2 or 3 months with getting big NIL money. Yeah. And what you're seeing is very dangerous. And it's a major league risk to this sport, but also to the lives of some of these young men. And some of these young men, some of them come to my line camp, and I know them. And I know their background, I know their family situation. They don't have a voice. They don't have anybody that's going to stand up for them. And to me, I just think it's my responsibility. I've been put in this place at this time, in this place, to be a voice for them, for the community team, for the community player. But to me, the struggling community team, that when you line up and you see them against an all-star team, sometimes just going to say it the way it is. Sometimes it's a bloodbath. And JoQ Public, they don't see that. But when we look at the film of that, coaches, and you dissect that and you see what's going on, it is not pretty.
And I would assume that, struggling community program, like you said, those parents or those guardians, they're the same ones signing that document you mentioned earlier. And I'm assuming they got no idea who their kid is about to go up against, do they?
No, when they send him out that front door, he gets on that team bus and he travels over to that stadium, they have no idea. And here's the thing too, when you got a concentration of, like, if there's an elite player on the other team, and even a struggling community team can do this, there's a few ways to neutralize an elite player, and everybody in the coaching profession knows it. You avoid him, you run away from him. Yeah. Okay? You read him, okay, or you double team him. The more of those you get, you take the ability to neutralize, number one, for your own team. And when there's a concentration, when it's 4, 5, 6, 7 of those players, elite players, you're sending your kids into a meat grinder, And like I said, there are community teams that are very competitive, and they'll compete against those and they'll win some. But again, it's not about winning. There are struggling teams. Like you said, they go out that front door, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, grandmother, whoever they're living with, grandfather. They don't have no idea what they're sending them up against, And I'll tell you, I didn't know.
Wow. I can't imagine how eye-opening that was for y'all and for that central board.
Well, I say this: there was a couple of times in that meeting, there was I don't know how you describe it, but maybe there were uh, a collective gasp on a couple of those kind of.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct.
Wow.
Just kind of piggybacking off of what Coach has said. I mean, we knew going into this, that in a certain circle we're going to be ridiculed, and
Sure.
I don't care. I mean, that stuff. I mean,
yeah.
Who cares? I mean,
when you're doing what you believe, when you're doing what you believe is right, who cares about the naysayers?
Well, at the end of the day, I mean, I have a 3-year-old son that I want to play high school football. I mean, I love high school football. It's been part of my life for most of my life, and I want him to have an opportunity to play. But in some of these circumstances, I don't know how comfortable I would be allowing him to play if we're going to let. I mean, I don't know. Maybe my dad raised me a little bit different, but he raised me to hate a bully. And the way I look at it, if I'm taking 4 or 5 of your best players and 4 or 5 of the team next to you's best players, and then turning around and just beating the stew out of you with those same players, I mean, that's what else is it? So, there's a reason in our state that we don't have 1A schools play 7A schools. We have a classification based off of enrollment, because logically, if there's somewhat equal distribution, schools of similar enrollment size should play one another.
Yeah.
And then there's also a reason that we came in and said, all right, we're going to put a multiplier on city schools,
Right.
because a city school whose school zone is the city limits of Mobile, Alabama, which I coached one of those, has an advantage. Well, hey, when I was at McGill-Tulane, we played 6A football when there were 6 classifications. So we played the largest schools in the state of Alabama, because we knew, the fact that we drew students from all over the city of Mobile gave us a competitive balance. We didn't need to play 5A sports, which was where our actual enrollment numbers would be. The state has since put in competitive balance, because again, the multiplier didn't really do exactly what they wanted it to do. They felt like competitive balance. But then you look around, I mean, private schools probably have it worse than anyone right now, because they're having to compete against schools who can take unlimited transfers, when most private schools, if they get transfers, are going to have to sit out a year.
Yeah.
So you kind of look at the disadvantages of this. Well, that's really all it's about, is trying to do something that makes sense. Just to allow people to go out and do what high school sports are supposed to be about. And that's, hey, some years I'm going to be pretty good and we're going to win a bunch of games, and maybe next year we're not. Well, that's not necessarily the end of the world. We're still teaching kids a lot of things.
That's exactly right. I always go back. I've had this conversation in the past with Coach Yeager about Hal Riddle, like when he was at Hewitt Trustful, because like Hal, I've known Hal forever. He was my driver's ed teacher. And I'll tell you this the same way I told Coach Yeager. I use this very loosely. He was my golf coach. Now he was our schedule maker in the spring, and occasionally he'd bring his wooden clubs and come play with us. Cracks me up, but he would always say that kind of sentiment, and I could feel that near the end of his tenure at Hewitt Trustful. I mean, there was kind of that. Now, were they very good at the time? Not really. Had things gotten a little flat? Yes. Was it maybe time for a change? Maybe so. But he kind of stood his ground in that kind of thing that you mentioned, Coach, the kind of the education through athletics mindset kind of thing, and what this level of football should be about. And it seems like we're at a time where we are located geographically, just surrounding us, things that are happening over in Georgia, things that have happened in Florida, this mess that's starting to happen up in Tennessee with lawmakers up there. I don't know if y'all have probably seen that. But it seems like, a lot of people will say about a bunch of different things, not just high school football, but education, whatever it might be, that Alabama is behind. You hear it all the time in any kind of topic, but like I think in this particular regard, with NIL, with transfers, with stuff like that, I am very much okay with Alabama being behind, because I think where Alabama still is currently is where I think high school sports should be. Like with what y'all are doing, you're not just super quick to be like, oh, let's get this NIL in here and let's have transfers and do all this. Let's continue keeping this about the education as long as we can, please.
Well, the interesting thing on NIL, every time one of them tells me we need to have NIL, and there's some people that are very loudly screaming we need to have NIL. Yeah. My question always is, who's going to pay it? Well, I mean, they fool around and think for a few minutes. The only honest answer is agents. Is that really who we want educating our 14, 15, 16-year-olds? Agents? If that's your best answer, come on.
One thing, too, you're asking about why we got into this. Mm-hmm. When we first started this, there was some information that we needed really to get a baseline to start. So we talked to some coaches that basically their teams have been poached of players. Yeah. And what's funny, too, you see this pattern. This is one of the patterns, too. You get them looking at AI. There becomes a team that's vulnerable. And it's not just one team that poaches his players, man. They'll all jump on that thing, and it's so we talked to some of these coaches, and we were warned. I mean, we were warned because they were vocal. They reported things, and they got demonized, and they said, man, before you take one step down this path, you better be darn sure. Yeah. And so there were two coaches I can think of, that are very, very respected in this state. And they did report, to the Alabama High School Athletic Association. It did not turn out the way they wanted. But when it came out, the article came out that we addressed the Central Board, I got a call and he said, well, you better be ready, But, to me, I'll be honest with you, I did not want this fight. I didn't. I wanted to be left alone. I wanted to coach my guys. And I just want to go do football. I want to go. I love the offensive line. I want to go coach my linemen every day. I didn't want to go look at 4,300 athletes in the offseason. That's not how I wanted to spend my offseason. I didn't want to do that. But sometimes, there's a saying that says the only way that evil triumphs is for good men to do nothing. I'm not saying I'm a good man, but I know one thing, that if it beats the heck out of sitting there saying somebody needs expecting good men to step up and do something. And so I'm fallible. I know that, and if people want to jump on me, they've got a lot of material. So, have at it. And that's okay. But it's not about people. It's about a threshold has been crossed. I'll tell you one other thing too, Gary, that there's some people on the other side of this table, and I'm just going to say it, that are friends of mine. We've had conversations. And one of them, this guy turned in a team that was poaching his players at one time and nothing happened. And so he said, this is the only way that I can survive. And so, there's a part of that. I get it, and if we'll do what we're supposed to do as an association and as a profession, I don't want to have to push a younger generation. This is the only way that I can compete. And the other thing too is, like Bart said, you hear about these coaching transitions that are occurring in the offseason. And there's this new thing that says, can he attract talent, which really means it's code for can he recruit? It is what it is. And it used to be, tell us how you're going to develop the culture of your team. Tell us how you're going to take a guy that walks into your program as a little boy that's 14 years, or as a young boy at 14 years old. And when he's 18, how are you going to turn him into a man? And that was the biggest part of an interview. And that's what they really wanted to know. And that's how you were evaluated. And some of this is being created, that the outcome is everything. Do you walk away with the trophy? Do you walk away with the ring? Do you win? And it's just taking the place of everything. And those things are awesome. But the greatest win is when that young man walks across that stage at graduation. I want to know what part did football play in sending him on the correct trajectory for his life.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's what I want the profession to get back to.
Well, and that's so much that community thing, because if it's a kid who who learned through football, like y'all have said. Chances are that particular kid is not playing college football, but he's going to want to probably come back to Mountain Brook or come back to Alma Bryant because he had such a great experience. It was profound for him. Now we start creating these. I think you used the phrase all-star teams, where they're just in my mind, it's almost like, and I'm sure they'll have great memories there, whatever. But you're kind of just using it as a launching pad to get to the next thing for yourself. Are you going to come back? Like, because it feels like we're on the cusp at some of these places where you're probably going to lose a lot of your community in the future at the expense of just trying to win now or get these offers now and all that kind of stuff. And it's really frustrating to watch it unfold.
If you've ever gone back to a reunion, a 20, 25-year reunion, and with your football buddies from high school, man, is there anything like that? And you go back, I've got a hometown I can go back to. And when I go back to my hometown, there's still some old codgers that talk about, boy, back when you played football, X, Y, you were terrible, or whatever it was, They still remember, and then that's community football. That's what community football is about, is that I'm a product of this community. And when I step out there on Friday night, I'm representing all you guys. And man, is there a greater thrill than to know that you are representing the people of your community, that you are that community. And then 25, 30, 50 years later, you're still that community, you still have a home,
That's right.
Yeah. I tell you, one of the interesting things that Coach Yeager was able to pull was you just look no further than the state of Florida, where they have basically said, hey, transfer during the middle of the year, go play football at one school and basketball at another and baseball at a third if you want to. And what it's done to the numbers of players playing football. It's remarkable when you look at the differences, the difference in the total population of the states, but they have a very small amount more kids playing football than we do in the state of Alabama. I'm sure there are several factors because of that, but just talking to coaching colleagues in that state, they feel like one of the biggest problems is, two ends really. I mean, hey, why would I play and put all this hard work in, and in my junior year, they recruit some hot shot in, and then the second part of that is why would I play at my school who may be which there's nothing wrong with that, and but we're going to have to play against this team of 4 and 5 stars with 24, 25 stars on their offense sometimes. That's not a lot of fun. So,
No.
We laugh, but that was starting to trickle into our state, and we see some teams in our state with that collection of stars, and so I don't think that's a road that any of us really wants to head too far down.
Well, we'll start to wrap this up, but did y'all expect when you kind of started this, like Coach Yeager, I think you said earlier, kind of this tight timeline? Did y'all expect like a task force to be created and that kind of thing? And what happens now, basically?
Well, I'll let Bart talk more about that, but the big thing is we'll get the Dragonfly numbers. The people on the task force, whoever the task force is, they'll get the Dragonfly numbers now, and they'll be working with real information and, addressing it from there. I'll let you go ahead, Bart.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know when we started this that we had any expectation. Personally, I mean, I've been pretty down on the High School Athletic Association the last couple of years. Now there's a new regime in, but I've been pretty frustrated with the inaction on some schools that I not only felt like, but I knew that they had ample opportunity to enforce some rules that were not enforced, in my opinion. So I've been pretty down on the association and pretty vocal about that. But so you go in with not knowing what your expectations are. But kudos to Mr. Harmon for allowing us to present this. The data is the data. I mean, we just simply presented the data. And when we finished that presentation, I don't think Terry Curtis, the Central Board President, or Mr. Harmon, the Executive Director, had many options, because the table immediately, the minute we finished talking and said thank you, immediately there was someone from the Central Board interjecting that they were just in shock at this information, and that maybe not in shock, but that this information demanded action. And then that was followed up by several other people who suggested a task force. And then it was, just around the room at that Central Board table, one after another, about, giving this task force the opportunity to really dig in and get something done about this issue. So Coach, I think you can speak more to that even, but it was kind of from my viewpoint at least, almost like a unanimous voice coming out of that Central Board table that we needed to take action on this.
I think Mr. Harmon's vision, I think, we're at a crossroads in this state. And if you go back again, it always goes back to what's your mission? I mean, when you think about when our association was formed decades and decades ago, why did they do it? And number one is human nature is to try and gain advantage, to try and win. That's human nature. Okay. To what degree will you do that? And that's why rules are in place. But everybody that joined this said, this is going to be our mission. This is going to be our core values. And this is what we're going to do. And so when you look around, like I hear Terry Curtis speaking, and Terry Curtis, and I hear Mr. Harmon speaking, and they look around and they know that people have thrown up their hands and they've quit. Like if you look at Florida, Florida's got 22 million people in that state. They've got 37,000 football players. We have 5 million with 35,000. Florida's losing 500 players a year, and their coaches. Every time you talk to a coach in Florida on this subject, now maybe not everybody wants to be an IMG now, but they are bleeding players. And you know who they're bleeding? They're bleeding the 98%. They are bleeding the community football player, and every one of them says if we could go back, if we could turn the hands of time backwards, we would fight our guts out. And it's just like Coach Saban, when Coach Saban talks about the transfer portal, the NIL, and when that changed, it changed the whole sport.
Yep.
And we have an opportunity, and I think Mr. Harmon realizes this. I think Terry Curtis realizes this. I think there is an army of people when you hear the people across this state, and it's just an outcry, and you look at the percentages on those proposals, it says something has got to change. There is an outcry that says in the state of Alabama, we're going to be the beacon of light, and we're going to save this sport, and it is going to be what it was intended to be by the people that founded this thing. And if somebody else wants to go and build an IMG, go build it. But again, we got to do one of two things: either change the mission statement of the Alabama High School Athletic Association, the core values. We've either got to change those, and we've got to say, what, we're banning this. It's all about winning. It's all about outcome. Let's build as many IMGs as we can, or, we've got to fight for that. And so right now, thank goodness we've got an executive director that's saying, I choose to fight.
Well said. Let's wrap it up right there. No offense, Bart, but I don't think either of us can top that.
Absolutely.
Man, that's very interesting stuff. Thank y'all for just doing it and kind of, leading by example, and certainly thank you for talking to me about it today, and just kind of enlightening me on some of this stuff. It's really interesting. Obviously, it's obviously like controversial in some ways, I guess, but it's so needed and has been, and looking forward to seeing kind of where it can go, and certainly logging into old Dragonfly come August, and seeing what we see with that newfound transparency. So I appreciate you guys, and hopefully y'all can focus on your teams for a bit this spring and summer now.
Absolutely.
Thank
Well,
you for having me. Okay.
Yeah, no, I appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
See y'all later.